You keep trying stuff out. You keep trying to find out where your talent ends, right? You're always looking over the edge. Hey, hey, down there. I am not going down there. And you're always on the edge out there looking over it, you know, wondering how far you can push it.
Hello, I'm George Plimpton. Our guest today on Writer's Workshop is by now a familiar face to you. You watched him pitching questions at poets, and journalists, and fiction writers. And now it's his turn at bat. His name is William Price Fox, and he's a Southern novelist with a personal curveball style that has something in it of humor, something of dialect, and low-life local color, and something of sound. The sound of words is Fox's starting point whenever he writes. And when he's teaching creative writing, that's where he tells his students to start. You find your own voice, he says, and you take it from there. Because if the words you write are not your own sound, they're somebody else's. And if you don't start with your own special sound, you've lost the game before the first inning is over. That's what you'll hear him tell his students as he switches from questioner to questionee on today's Writer's Workshop.
I don't keep a notebook. I don't like to do that. I think if you do that, you run the risk of having all these Henny Youngman one-liners and you start plugging them in, you know. I think that's terrible. I think the lines you remember, the good lines and the good things you remember, and they sit in your head, they stay there, and they'll come out when you need them. If you have a list of them, and you start writing, you got a long list of these things over here, keep watching, when can I get this? That's stupid, because then you can see where you scotch tape them in. You can see it, a lot of writers are like that. You see these great one-liners, you say, wait a minute, that's nothing to do with this. It doesn't quite come out of this. And it's got to be earned out of that exact moment, or it does not work. And I'm a very tough critic on what I publish, and I just don't want to do that. But a lot of people can keep, you know, good journals. I can remember songs very easy. You know, there's a song kicking around now called "I'm in the yellow pages listed under fool." That's a great line. You know, God. The rest of the song's not very good, but that's a great line. But you can't forget something like that. And you can play around with combinations of that too, you know.
You're so well known for your mastery of the short stories. What do you think makes for a good short story?
Lord, let me see. You remember Kurt's tape about people wanting stuff, you know? Everybody wants something. I think if the characters want something, that out of their wanting, they reveal their character, and the plot comes out of that. I think it's all people are, they want to get someplace. Let me see if I can explain that. I took all that joke a long time ago, I'll tell you it again. And it's a great story. All right, it goes this way. There's a seeing-eyed dog standing on a corner of Main and Gervais, and his dog is peeing on his leg. So I get over and notice a fellow's trying to feed this dog a fig Newton. So I say, mister, do you know that dog is peeing on your leg? And the blind man said, I sure as hell do. And when I find his head with his fig Newton, I'm going to kick his ass. Now that story will answer all of the Aristotelian, you know, who, what, where, when, the unity of space, time, action. The fig Newton is just resist. You cannot change it to an Oreo or a saltine or a tuna fish salad sandwich, can you? It's got to be a fig Newton. That's almost what you call the, Eliot's objective correlative, right? That's right on it. You cannot move it. And everything in that story is just there. And all right, I want to know what's going on. I want to know what that fig Newton is doing. I want to know why that dog is peeing on that guy's leg. I don't know why he's putting up with it. The dog wants to take a lick, obviously, and the blind man wants to kick his ass. Everybody wants something, right? The man, the blind man, and the dog. And that's a super, I never used that before in class. That's a super way of isolating what a short story is and the elements therein, right? Everybody wants something, but it's tremendously shrunk. Now, most jokes are like that. People want something and they can't get it, and then they get it or they don't get it, but there's that resistance. In philosophy, it's called Hegelian logic, right? And you needn't read any of that stuff. It's impenetrable. But that's how it works, I think. And I've been wrong consistently 18 years. That's
Well,
my idea of it.
What qualities make a good writer?
Oh, God, let's see. I think that kind of playing around, with words, that as much as anything. Plus, when I was at Iowa, I was there for about 7 years and teaching the writer's workshop. They did tests on us, all of us. It's a big psychiatric clinic, and they determined how much schizophrenia is among writers. And they found a great deal. Manageable schizophrenia. I mean, we're all crazy, but we're employable, But they found a lot of that where you just were able to cut off and do something, I think that you need a little bit of that, not enough to get paper slippers, but a little bit of that where you can cut off and assume a position, assume a different role, get inside a person and work yourself out. That's one thing. I think the biggest thing, I guess, is just straight, just sheer energy, just incredible energy. I mean, just where you never stop, where you work 12 hours, 24 hours, and, live on apples and, anything you want, and just keep on going. And when you're working real good, you go into an overdrive. I mean, new gears cut in, where you've got to get that far into a block of time to experience that, I think. I was living in LA. I was working from midnight until 9 in the morning straight through. I'd eat apples and sardines. I had tons of money in the bank, but I didn't care. All I wanted to do was, eat sardines and write. And that's what happens. But you need that energy to do that. That may be the best thing. If you're very intelligent, you can figure things out. You might be able to avoid that, but I don't see how you can do that. I think you got to write through so much crap in your system. I mean, like 90% of it's crap anyway, to get to that 10% that makes some sense. You need that energy to get through that stuff.
With you, what comes first? Is it characters that you build a story around, or is it a storyline that you find characters for?
Neither one. I usually get going with a sound, how somebody sounds, and then I kind of keep stretching that and keep pushing it against the wall and see how far it goes. And see, when you write fiction, you can assume, you aren't dealing with the truth, right? You're dealing with fiction. And I've always assumed that if something sounds right, it is right. I know that's simplistic, but I somehow think if it sounds right, it's going to be right for me. So I'll just get somebody talking, like, I never used this, but when I interviewed Satchel Paige one time, and he said, this is how he sounds. I said, how'd you picture Ted Williams? He said, Williams? I said, yeah. He said, low. Low and outside. Up in here, shame on you, right? And all of his sentences had that glide to him, right? And I think if you get a hold of that sound of Satchel's and know that everything he says is going to be wrapped around that sound or running through that sound, then you get a feeling of what Satchel is like. And Satchel is like that sound. I mean, Satchel has all the moves you hear in those sentences, and very few people have. I mean, he pitched double headers, back-to-back shutouts, get in his car and drive 400 miles and pitch another game, night game. And he'd have $1 million one week and broke the next. But a flamboyant type thing. And he had enough color within him to support that system of sounds that he used in his phrasing. I never thought this thing out quite like this, but I think that people will talk the way they are. I mean, I talk very fast, right? I'm trying to talk slowly now. But I have not a lot going on, but I just want to say it in a hurry, right? I don't know what that means. That means a hyper, obviously, but it means other things too. And if someone talks very slowly and is very boring, right away, that's where they are. That's how I start. I start with sound. and then I work out from there.
Why do you use so much black dialect in your stories?
Let me see. Black dialect. Well, see, I grew up in Columbia, and we grew up in my uncle and my uncle and dad. Dad had 11 brothers and 1 sister, and they were all in bootlegging. And we grew up in the black section, you know, selling whiskey, making it, selling it, the whole thing. I didn't, but they did, and I kind of helped out. And I was around a lot of, and Dad had his own black band. He had a group called the Hawaiians. I put it in Dixie on the Moon. And they would play, in Columbia here, they played one Hawaiian song called Little Grass Shack in Kealaka, Ku, Hawaii. That's the only song they knew, and then the rest would be Spanish, you know. And they figured no one knew the difference, and no one did, you know. And they're always screwing around like that. And there are always blacks in the house, you know, and they're always arguing or talking or telling jokes or drunk or something like that. And I picked up on it very early. And they don't have the vocabulary the whites have, but they have they use it better. They can take a word and, you know, remember Sugar Ray Robinson? Not the old one, the boxer. I mean, he had it's like Satchel Paige in a way. He said he used to ride in an orchid-colored Cadillac, one of the big wingtips, and wear purple and orange suits. And they asked him one time when he quit boxing for a while and became a dancer, and he danced on the Apollo stage. And the interviewer said, "What do you think of dancing, Sugar Ray?" He says, "At last I found my true métier." Now, a white man can't say that, right? There's no way for him. And a white gal can't say, right? But see, blacks have so many moves that we don't have. And what I try to do is bring them together a lot. Or just use black. But it's a bigger range than we have. And they can take sentences and make them glide the way Satchel does. Let me see. I was when Dad quit bootlegging, went into refrigeration mechanic work, which is about the same thing. I used to help him. And we'd go out to these honky-tonks around Columbia and work on the beer coolers, you know. And I'd be underneath there watching these compressor gauges to balance the sulfur dioxide. And this couple were arguing. I'll never forget it. I mean, this is 25 years ago at least. And this gal says, "I got to go home now." And the big guy says, "You ain't going nowhere." I said, "You done sat down and drank up all my beer money. We're going to go out and ride around a little bit." I mean, and ride around a little bit had a real heavy equipment sound to it, you know. And whites don't do that, you know. They don't play with the language that way. And unless you, now McPherson uses that a lot. You know, read Jim's stuff real close. He has that sound. And most whites don't, and it's too bad because it's just marvelous stuff. You can just take it and you do so much more with it, I think.
While we're semi on the subject of Southern fiction, how do you feel about that label of a Southern writer? It's sort of a multifaceted question here.
Yeah,
do you think there's a difference between Southern writing and, say, the writing of Updike and any other name that might come to mind?
Yeah, I can never put my finger on what it is. It's we're more oral down here. We talk more, and you can hear more in this stuff. And there's more. I mean, there's objective correlatives of more. There's kudzu and there's Dr. Pepper. There's all these name brands we can drop in. The Jewish crowd in New York do the same thing. You know, it's the same thing there. But I think we have. Let me see. See, the blacks and the black and white combination out here is just wonderful for the language. Let me see that. And some things doesn't travel north. They're only here. When Time magazine came down a couple of years and asked us for one-liners about what Carter was like, remember all that? And they interviewed a few of us, and I said, "You can't. While this stuff doesn't travel, it's got to be used down here." And the example I used was when this black goes out to order some barbecue, and blacks around here speak very clear because they don't want to be asked to repeat themselves, you know. So they speak almost Trinidadian, you know, a lot of them. And this black says, "I would like a sliced barbecue and an orange drink." And the little redneck behind the counter says, "What size orange drink?" He's not ready for that. He says, "Huge." Now you can't write that. You know, if you write that, it'll look idiotic. You know, unless you use, you know, to be spoken softly or with flute accompaniment or something. You can't. But you can. But as long as you hear that sound in your head when you write, I think you're way ahead of people writing out of, say, Brockton, Massachusetts, because they aren't aware of that sound, I don't think. And we're a smaller, tighter culture. We know one another. Your families go way back, and you can relate. You go to funerals a lot. You know, up north, there's no funerals. Hell, they all just vanished. Somebody's dead and they're gone, you know. We had a funeral a couple years ago, and Grandma said, a great aunt or whatever, she was just said, Lord, we were burying them like hogs last year. I mean, they're proud of funerals. They put out the hams, you know, and it's a way of keeping in touch. And up north, as you go north, not as north necessarily, but as you head toward New York, and that's what I think it was in Chicago, you lose that quality. And in losing it, you pick up a tougher edge. You get something. Nelson Algren's a very good example of that edge. You know what I'm talking about? That sound, that Chicago sound. And it's different than, say, Carson McCullers' sound, which is a lovely, long, nice, balanced line, I think.
Then do you think that the comedy comes through because that you have that in you? And do you ever worry about not being taken as seriously as some other writer because you write comedy, or you
I never think about that
comedy
I
in your
really
work?
don't think about that too much. The first part is why is it comedy? You mean?
Yeah.
Tell me why. It was why am I funny?
Did you choose? Well, no, not why are you funny? We have our own ideas about that.
Why am I? I don't know.
What I want to know is, you said before that you started out, you sort of entered writing because you told jokes and you entertain people and you are a good storyteller. What I want to know is, do you deliberately work for the comedy effects that come across in your writing?
No, because I don't try to be funny. It comes across that way, I guess. I just think comedy is such a great shortcut for stuff. You talking about? I did a piece in the 60s on immigration down here, and it was in the air. It wasn't original, but it was great. God, and it just no longer than that. And it was a social worker interviewing a black field hand. He says, social worker, what you folks want is your place in the sun. And the black field worker, no sir, we've had that. We want a piece of that shade now. Well, that says more than 20 pages of social, right? It really does. And you can do so much more with humor because you can bring it together. The same message is there if you're going for message, but it's also, it's got a ring to it, right? You'll never forget that line there in a way, will you? Another example is that I don't think that tragedy and humor are, I think they're one. I think they're always like this. And when it's missing, as I think it's missing in Hemingway, almost always. He's not a funny writer. When that's missing, these things, something's missing there. To kind of, there's openings there that should be closed. You can have, a good example is when I had a kid brother died of cancer in 1960, 60, 70, 65. And as he was dying, I was there with his wife, and he said, told his wife, said, Mary Lou, thumbs. He called me thumbs because I was very awkward with mechanics, and he was a very good mechanic. He's an engineer. Thumbs will take care of everything. And Mary Lou said, what do you mean? And he said, Mary Lou, you're in the middle of an inside joke. And that's the last thing he said. He died. Now, most people's ideas of death scenes are, the cross and reaching, and this and this and all this stuff. And his idea was, well, I don't know what his idea was, but it's a mix, right? And in that mix is what I think is where humor and tragedy come together, okay? And I think once you separate those and use comedy as relief, people falling in horse troughs and Martin and Lewis, just junk, or Bob Hope one-liners, you lose what comedy is. Robin Williams, his name, he's a good comic. Funny and crazy, That's my idea, for what it's worth.
I want to know about the growth of short stories into novels. How you know when you've got an idea that can get much bigger and expand on into a novel. And what's the difference in dynamic? Working on them is different, too.
Yeah, that's a good question there, because, let me see. You'll just one day be writing along on a short story, and you get hold of a character or a sound or a situation that resists ending, right? Or you'll end it and you'll say, that's not enough, and you keep adding. And the dynamics are, it's just a bigger throw, it's called. It's a bigger move. And you don't let the, I mean, that blind man story, I keep using that. That's the ending there. You can't go beyond that, right? They crossed the street and had a cup of coffee and some prune Danish, but you know, the story is over, right? But in some stories where you don't sense an ending is coming, just let it go for a while, and then it'll end of its own. And then often you can get way out, and the characters are getting more and more complex and more and more interesting. Then you can fan them out even bigger like that. That's again, it's all, see, most writing is feeling. That's the whole, it's all feeling. Some people that work on structure, you know, they line it out, and they do very well that way. But I work just the opposite. I work on what if I feel like doing, I do. When I feel not well about it, I cut it off. But I think you can sense that. Well, you can sense an ending, too. When stuff locks together, then it's over.
When you talk about, you think in order to, not in order to be a good writer, but it helps, like if you're very poor, it seems extremes more or less. I think a lot of times we kind of have it against us if we're middle class, raised middle class, and I think most of the literature that I read is my complaint is that it's so much that way. You know, it's like someone says, oh, this is real exciting, and then you read it and you go, what's exciting about it? You know, it's not exciting at all. And it's getting away from that viewpoint that the kind of incidental things that happen to you are exciting when they're not. They really happen to everybody. Do you know what I mean? So you work better in extremes.
Yeah, because I think fiction requires either that extreme or such a penetration, like someone like Kafka or Camus, you know, where you do a whole different, such an intellectual thing, you know, or Marquez. I think for us, not on that level, we need that extreme to get us going. Some good advice when I went to New York sales, I went into packaging selling, which is very, very complicated selling. I had to do designing, printing, cellophane, all kinds of combinations, involving all kinds of machinery, all kinds of purchasing agents. Got involved with graft, got involved with the mafia. I mean, just a wow, great, wonderful thing, you know, but rotten. I mean, just control corruption. The manager said, you cannot learn this stuff unless you stay here 3 or 4 years. I said, well, how am I going to learn it? He says, I'm not going to teach you. He says, here's a bag of samples and a price book. Go out and get in trouble, and I'll get you out. And I went and got in trouble, he got me out. I went and got in more trouble, he got me out. I kept getting more and more and more trouble, and I kept getting out. I think writing's the same way. You got to get yourself in trouble and dig yourself out. Now, if you're from a middle-class family with an income of $80,000 or whatever it is now, $60,000, and you have no requirements on you, it's going to be hard to get in trouble, right? I mean, you can shoot up on heroin for a while, but that ain't going to do it. You've got to do something. I don't know. It's going to be hard to do it. If you have money, it's hard to pretend you don't have it, right? You can always pick up the phone and call. But when I hitchhiked to Miami, I mean, I went down with a friend, and he left me down there. He said, I can't stand this. I said, so long. And I couldn't call anybody. If I call up, it says, let's call collect. Or send some money, the rent's due. I mean, I could not, I was down on my own, you know. And until you've done that, again, until you've done that, unless you're like one of these, you know, great masters, until you've done that, then you aren't able to get out there, you know, on the edge and try stuff out. Because writing is you keep trying stuff out, you keep trying to find out where your talent ends, right? You're always looking over the edge. Hey, hey, down there. I'm not going down there. And you're always on the edge out there looking over it, you know, wondering how far you can push it. And if you write, and I try to write differently every time. I try to do everything different. I don't try to do the same thing. I have a lot of friends that are writers that make a lot of money writing the same book over and over again. And I think that's silly. If you're going to do that, you might as well be back in sales. It's more fun, sales, than writing the same book over. So I did a book, you know, from a woman's point of view, Ruby Red, you know, and this other book's I take different points of view.
I'd like to go back with your advice to young writers. I think looking back in the semester, the most valuable advice you gave in class wasn't really advice, it was criticism. When you told us last week we were all lazy. I was wondering if, just for inspiration, if you'd repeat that for us. Castigate us some more.
Well, let me see. I think once you realize that 3/4 of what you write is going to be crap, you know. And for the first 3 or 4 years that you write, you've got to just do 1,000 pages to get rid of that crap. Once you realize that, then you'll get to it. A lot of y'all sit around and write about emotions, or you write about, you say, I'm now going to try to write humor. I'm going to try to write funny. I'm going to try to write a scene. I'm going to try to write about colors or meaning. It doesn't work that way. You've got to just do everything at once. It's got to be a story. It's like that damn blind man and the dog. It's got to be a story. Something's got to happen. Somebody wants something, and you want to know what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. And within that context, everything will, you know, everything else, you can use everything in there. But laziness is strange, and I know what I'm talking about, because I am the same way. I mean, I'll sit there and type, you know, hour, you type it over again and get nothing done but repeat what I already had already. Everybody does that. You got to learn to break that. That's called lazy there, or thinking about what you're going to write, or taking a long walk and thinking about it. You're not working until you're working. That's the secret. And you have a lot of pages, and then you spread it out and see what you've got and see where the energy is best and go with that. But it takes that. And you shouldn't be in school. You should get the hell out and, you know, write. You know, you shouldn't take any courses. Take one course. But you should, and right now when you're in school, you have more time than you'll ever have in your whole life, right now. And when I was in New York, when I first started writing, I had a full-time job, full-time divorce, full-time sideline, another job, and I wrote 2 books within that. And I slept maybe 4 or 5 hours, and I still played golf, you know. You just can't watch TV. You just can't stand around and talk about the weather. You just got to do things. You got to move it. And you got to learn to sit down. The minute you sit down, start working, not start sharpening pencils. Just sit down and get at it. And if you can't get started fast enough, if you sit there, and the first 5 minutes are so important. And the best trick I know is to take the page you did the night before and rework. Just do it again. Type it again or rewrite it again, however you work, just to get back in the mood. But don't let that first 5 minutes go by without getting into it, because if 5 minutes go by, then 10, it'll keep on going. Everybody's nodding. That's right. You know, same with me. It's spooky because you got to watch yourself and see what your habits are, and you got to correct yourself. And I still cannot do it. I'm not talking about somebody that do it. You know, I know what I'm talking about. I have the same problem now. I worked, let's see, night before last, didn't get a thing done. Went on watch TV at 3 in the morning, drank beer, and I woke up just furious, you know, headache.
This is George Plimpton thanking you for participating in our Writer's Workshop. Please join us again next time.